On a recent night at Princeton University, tension crackled in the air. Inside a packed lecture hall, former Israeli Prime Minister Bennett took the stage. Outside, 200 angry protesters beat drums and chanted so loudly that their voices echoed through the stone walls. As Bennett spoke, a group of students suddenly stood up and shouted him down. "Bennett, you can't hide. We charge you with genocide." They stormed out to cheers from the crowd outside. Moments later, chaos peaked. Someone pulled a fire alarm, sending sirens shrieking through the hall. The message from the protesters was deafening. "We will not let you speak." Put yourself in that room. A controversial figure is trying to talk, and a furious mob is determined to stop it. Is this righteous protest or the death of free speech? Do we shut down speech because an audience finds it offensive, even hateful? In a free society, how far should we go in allowing the heckling, the shouting, the threats, before we say, enough, let them speak? These questions aren't abstract. They're exploding on campuses and streets right now, from battles over Israel and Palestine to fiery debates about gender pronouns. At their core is a fundamental dilemma. Does the loudest, angriest voice get to veto what the rest of us are allowed to hear? America's First Amendment traditional answer has been no. Our law fiercely guards against what's known as the heckler's veto. In plain terms, when someone exercises their right to speak, the government can't shut them down just because others hate their message. A heckler's veto is what happens when authorities silence a speaker to appease an angry crowd. The Supreme Court and free speech defenders have warned for decades that if we allow this, we empower bullies and mob censorship. The rule is supposed to be, police the crowd if you must, but don't punish the speaker for the crowd's outrage. Why is the heckler's veto dangerous? Imagine every time you voiced an unpopular opinion, anyone who disagreed could simply threaten havoc, and bam, you'd be shut up for safety. Free speech would exist only for the bland and the inoffensive. The very speech that most needs protection, the provocative, the challenging, the upsetting kind, would never be heard. As one court put it, public expression of ideas may not be prohibited merely because the ideas are offensive to some of the hearers. In other words, your right to speak can't depend on someone else's outrage. If we didn't have the rule, you can imagine how limited free speech would be. Opposition to affirmative action? Banned. Discussing critical race theory? Banned. Border security protests? Banned. Satirizing religious beliefs? Banned. To understand how serious this principle is, consider a notorious free speech battle from American history. Skokie, Illinois, 1977. An American Nazi group, yes, actual neo-Nazis in full uniform, announced plans to march through Skokie, a town home to thousands of Holocaust survivors. The outrage was immediate. Skokie's residents were horrified. City officials tried everything to ban the Nazi march. They knew violence was likely if swastika-waving Nazis paraded past people who had literally survived Hitler's terror. By any human measure, the Nazis' message was pure evil. But the courts held their noses and upheld the Nazis' right to march. The Illinois Supreme Court ruled that the swastika was not a fighting word that would automatically provoke violence, and that you cannot forbid speech simply because it inflicts offense or fear. In the end, at the Supreme Court, the Nazis never actually marched in Skokie. They demonstrated in Chicago. But the principle was etched in history. Even the most repugnant speech is protected from the heckler's veto. If a city of Holocaust survivors couldn't bar Nazis from voicing their venom, none of us can count on censorship to shield us from offense. The Skokie case may be the most extreme example, but it's far from the only one. Jump forward to the 2000s and you find Westboro Baptist Church, a tiny, fanatical group known for picketing military funerals with signs declaring, "God hates fags," and "Thank God for dead soldiers." When U.S. Marine Matthew Snyder was killed in action, Westboro members showed up at his funeral to scream their cruel message at his grieving family. Snyder's family was devastated and sued Westboro for emotional distress. It's hard to imagine a more sympathetic plaintiff, a parent mourning a hero versus a hate-filled cult. Who wouldn't want to silence Westboro's vile insults? Yet in 2011, the Supreme Court sided with Westboro in an 8-1 decision. The court ruled that as long as Westboro protested peacefully on public land about issues of public concern, Their hateful speech was fully protected by the First Amendment. The hurt and anger of the funeral mourners did not justify punishing the protesters. In plain terms, the Constitution does not permit a heckler's veto, not even at a funeral of a fallen soldier. Think about that. America's commitment to free speech is so strong that it shields neo-Nazis marching in a Holocaust survivor community and extremists mocking dead soldiers at their burial. The court's message in these cases is directed at all of us. If you say you believe in free speech, you have to protect it when it's hardest to, when the speech makes your blood boil. It's the ultimate test. And now that test is in our faces again. Flash forward to today, and the fight over speech is raging in new forms. Our universities, supposedly marketplaces of ideas, have become battlegrounds of outrage. After the Hamas attacks on Israel in October 2023 and the war that followed, campus speech conflicts exploded. Students, professors, and invited speakers have faced backlash almost every single day since that war began, just for taking sides on the Israel-Palestine issue. Many campuses have seen pro-Palestinian students angrily protest anything deemed pro-Israel, and pro-Israel groups demand punishment for what they see as anti-Semitic speech. At Columbia, Stanford, Harvard, the story repeats. Furious demonstrators, canceled events, sometimes even physical intimidation. The Princeton incident with the Israeli Prime Minister was just one example. But here's the rub. Who gets to decide which views are too offensive to voice? University administrators? The loudest protesters? Politicians? If we yield to the heckler's veto on campus, no controversial speaker is safe, ever. Today it might be a pro-Israel speaker, shouted down as a genocide apologist. Tomorrow it could be a pro-Palestinian or Muslim speaker silenced. The precedent of giving in to whoever yells the loudest haunts everyone. The only consistent principle that preserves free discourse is this: let them speak. And if you disagree, answer them with words, not by tearing away their microphone. As painful as it is, that means allowing speech that many find deeply wrong. Meanwhile, far from the quads, another front in the speech wars is open: the battle over gender identity and pronouns. This might seem unrelated, but at its heart, it's about the same question. Let's go there. Can the government compel or silence your words because others demand it? In recent years, activists have pushed not just for a social courtesy in using preferred pronouns, but for laws and penalties. New York City, for example, put out guidelines that say employers or landlords who intentionally misgender someone, refusing to use their preferred pronoun, can face heavy fines. How heavy? Potentially up to $250,000 for the most willful violations. In the heart of America's biggest city, you could be hit with ruinous fines if you won't say she instead of he when someone demands it. To many, that sounds like basic respect. To others, including civil libertarians across the political spectrum, it sounds like compelled speech. The government forcing you to voice something you might not believe. These issues, campus protests, hate speech, pronoun laws, might seem separate, but they all boil down to a fundamental American test. Do we uphold free speech even when it offends, even when it deeply disturbs, even when our whole being wants to shout, "Shut 'em up"? Or do we justify the heckler's veto, telling ourselves, this one time, the speech was just too dangerous or hurtful to allow? Tempting, isn't it? Now I want to speak to you directly. You who might be watching this, maybe nodding along because you're sick of cancel culture and mob rule. Maybe you consider yourself pretty pro-free speech. Maybe you're fed up with woke censorship. That's good. But here's your challenge. Do you really stand for free speech when it counts? It's easy to defend speech you agree with, or speech that only offends people you don't like. But what about the speech that offends you? What about when it's your sacred values under attack, your community being insulted, your sense of truth being trampled? Will you still defend the principle? Resisting the heckler's veto is not just a high-minded ideal, it is essential to American liberty. The moment we start carving out exceptions, well, not that speech, that's too far, we set a precedent that erodes freedom for everyone. Because once you accept that speech can be silenced by sufficient anger or intimidation, you hand every bully a blueprint. If you want to censor something, just yell loud enough, threaten chaos, and watch the authorities do your bidding. Today the mob might be on one side, tomorrow the opposite side, but the pattern will be set. The mob that screams the loudest wins, and the First Amendment, it loses. So ask yourself, are we going to live in a society of adults who can tolerate dissent, or a society of infants who throw tantrums to get their way? The founders of this country chose the harder path. Let liberty flourish despite the risks. They knew the danger of speech, pamphlets that stirred revolution. Yet they enshrined protection for speech because they knew the danger of suppression was greater. Every generation since has had to recommit to that foundational bargain. So the next time you're tempted to cheer as protesters drown out a speaker you despise, or when you feel that itch to say there ought to be a law against some nasty opinion, remember, you're setting the stage for your own speech to be silenced one day. Free speech either stands for everyone or it falls for anyone. There's no middle ground. In the end, liberty is a package deal. You can't take the pieces you like, your own freedom to speak, and ditch the rest, the other guy's freedom to offend you. America at its best boldly answers offensive speech with debate, protest, and even moral condemnation, but not with suppression. We fight bad ideas with better ideas. American liberty hangs in the answer. Will you stand by the principle of I hate what you say, but I will defend your right to say it? Or will you sit back and let the hecklers rule? The choice, my friends, is ours, and it's one we make every day. Let's make it wisely. Let's choose freedom over the mob. Let's reject the heckler's veto while we still can. I'm Benjamin Barr, and I'm thrilled you joined me today. My goal as a constitutional litigator is to equip you with the tools to solve modern constitutional puzzles. Please be sure to like and subscribe, as it really helps me with this educational project. I hope you'll join me next week as we explore yet another constitutional controversy.